I hear you loud and clear. Scarlet and Violet has been quite a journey, and there's many people that perhaps rightfully, but maybe not, feel that this is going to be the end of Pokemon and they've ruined everything. But what we forget is that there's a history sometimes, and if we look at that history in just the right way, we can actually see there is some method to their madness. So today we're going to dive in, we're going to turn back time and look at the Pokemon cycle to understand, are we really in a bad place, or is this just status quo? So let's turn back time and look at the Pokemon cycle. Roll the intro. Bob, roll the intro. Bob? I don't know, maybe it takes a little while. Oh, here he is. So to start the journey, we first have to say, where did we come from? We won't go all the way back because Pokemon was still finding their legs and establishing how is this going to work long term. They started out with the initial idea of the TCG game itself, but that quickly became much more, and they saw the collectability and many other aspects and facets of what Pokemon is today. So looking back beyond, for example, Black and White, perhaps isn't quite as fair of a view, because there were still so many things in those early days that were starting to be settled out. They were changing companies, moving from WotC. It was a very different time. So let's turn back time and start to assess the Pokemon cycle. Whoa, wait. We went too far back. Nope, wait, we went too far forward. Let me fix this. Okay, all right, here we go. We're in the right place now. All right, so to kick off the journey, we're going to really ask that question, to fear or not to fear, right? A little bit of play on Shakespeare, but we can quickly start to see there is some real truth and some sanity in all the madness. So one of the key things that we notice when we look at the Pokemon cycle, it repeats itself. Now, it's not always exact. It changes a little bit from set to set and time frames, and some sets or some series have more sets than others. But when we look at the time across every series, we see the same pattern. We see a foundational set of cards that are initially released. We then get often a surprise several sets in that re-sparks the interest and touches back to some of the nostalgia that many of us have. It then goes into some mid-level tier and it fluctuates, and then they take us on an emotional roller coaster, giving us everything from the worst sets ever to the best sets ever, and then they finish that series with an amazing home run hit to really get everybody hyped up as we end a series and move into a new. And this ultimately is the Pokemon cycle. Well, you might look at that and wonder, that sounds great, but prove it to me. So let's take a look at the data. We always do this. We always go back and we take a look at the actual data. For this, we start with the Black and White series as our initial set. So that covers everything from the base set all the way down to Legendary Treasures. Now in this case, we typically talk about main expansions, but in this specific one, we also want to take into account a lot of the specialty sets, because you wouldn't have a full picture about a Pokemon cycle if you only talked about main expansions. So here, what we can now see is for every one of the released sets in the Black and White series, there is a ranking. Now my ranking is a very simple one, just to give us a score and we can start to see the trend. So a 1 will represent simply the lowest tier, lackluster set, not much in it. A 1.5 is moving up to that middle tier, a 2 is a middle tier, and a 3 is then the upper tier. And there's the in-between, the 1.5s, 2.5s, just depending on what is in the set. Now these rankings were based on noteworthy Pokemon, so Pokemon that were some of the most popular or perhaps raised some of the most value. And then we look at the overall set value, the trend of that set value, and then the average card price. So as we look across these, we can see very quickly that we start off with some lower end set values, and this is actually present set value. So this isn't the set value at the time of release, this is set value as of the present. And so this does give a pretty clear trend, but we also see the noteworthy Pokemon. They start off at the beginning of Black and White. There isn't much there. There's some Zekrom, some Pikachus. You might hit a Victini as you get into Noble Victories, but there's not much there. However, as soon as you start to then move down, you move into Next Destinies, you move into Dark Explorers, things start to then jump up quite a bit. What does that look like when we think of the overall trend? Well, that's why I put it into this ranking system so that you can actually see with this bar graph, what does that look like if you then trend the ranking of every set across time. And so once again, we can see here we're moving through what would be some foundational sets. We move up into a nice surprise with the Dark Explorers. We go into some middle to upper tier, and then we finish it off with a big bang with Legendary Treasures. Now this is just one example, but you can quickly see there's a trend that happens here, and especially as we look at this now set and over set and series over series. So let's look at XY. Do the same thing, looking at XY, everything from the base set all the way down to evolutions. And we have the same values here in terms of what we're capturing. So we're capturing, again, popular Pokemon or Pokemon that are noteworthy. We have the overall set value on the first column. And these are color-coded so that the dark green is the highest value within a given series. Yellow and orange start to move away. And then red, of course, is some of the lower values. And we do each of those color codings per value set. So we do the same thing for the trend, and then we do the same thing for the average card value. And if we look at this one, we can see something very, very similar. We start off with some foundations, maybe not as long of a period. We get a nice surprise. We get a nice Charizard set here with Flash Fire. And then we drop it back down. We're now somewhere in the middle tier. And then we go through an emotional roller coaster, up and down and up and down. And then we finish it off with a nice bang of evolutions to then finish off the series. So there's definitely a trend here. One more time, we can see this again with Sun and Moon. Laying it out a little bit quicker here, we can see that Sun and Moon very quickly becomes the same story. Now there's more sets. Every time we move through another series, we tend to have at least the same, but typically one or two more sets. So here I think we're somewhere around 12 or more. Even with a higher number of sets, we can still see that the trend is the same. We basically start off somewhat lackluster. There's only some Laprases, some Umbreons, some Ninetales. Not that great of initial sets. They're lower set values, they're lower trends, they're lower average card value. But then we get a nice surprise. We get another Charizard set. Ironically, again, the third set in. Now, Black and White didn't have a Charizard set at the third, and there's not always exactly the same numbers, but they do tend to give us a nice surprise between 3 and 4 sets in. They then dip back down into that middle tier, and then they move through the emotional roller coaster up and down and up and down. And then here in the Sun and Moon, we see just a really big bang, really finishing strong, and they just kind of consistently move their way up, finishing with Cosmic Eclipse, and we all know how Team Up was, of course. And then now we look at what we just left. Where did we just come from? We came from the Sword and Shield era, arguably I think the highest number of sets, and we see again the same trend. We see here a foundational baseline, a nice surprise with, you get it, Charizard set. We then move into a Champion's Path, which does also outperform it, and it also has another Charizard, so they double banged us there with the Charizard. They move into just a very short period of middle tiers, but then a longer emotional period of the up and downs with Evolving Skies and Celebrations. And then of course they finish it off very, very strong with the Crown Zenith set. Now let's take a look at the entire history lesson that this just taught us. From black and white, we see the foundations, and we kind of lay this out in a way that you can see it very clearly and see where these cycles are over the course of the sets. And if we look at this, and I'll lay them out all for you to see at one time, we can see that we have the foundations, surprise, middle tier, an emotional roller coaster, and then we hit some home runs. So then you have to ask yourself where we are today. Is Scarlet and Violet really gonna be that bad? I don't think so. I think this is status quo and business as usual. And with that in mind, we have Obsidian Flames right around the corner. What is that? Another Charizard set? Yes, it's the third. It just happens to be the third in the last 3 series. However, again, these numbers move depending on how many is in the set and how long they keep us within a given cycle. But overall, I think we're going to see the same trend. And what I didn't call out here from a presentation standpoint is what's around their kickbacks or the throwbacks to the original base sets. So we had it with Celebrations, we've had it with others as well. And so every now and then, they're also smart enough to know that they're going to drop in a kickback. And now we're about to do it again with some of the 151 and also the Classic Collection that they're going to release. These are then kickbacks to the nostalgia of their first generation. Their first generation of Pokemon players are now in their 30s and 40s. And we get to see really what does this mean over generations of the people who loved Pokemon as a child. They're in a consistent cycle to move through a child all the way to the adult and make sure that they're giving us products and features that adhere to what we want to see on all the different facets. So this is the reason for the cycle. The cycle is to ensure they can capture the entire audience. Foundation sets are really key to start off a new era for a TCG game. Surprise sets add a nice little flair to TCG while also giving some of us collectors or perhaps investors a nice high value set. And then we move into mid-tier, again expanding the TCG game, continuing to allow that to unfold as we then phase out the old and have rotation, move into the new, and of course continue to drop in nice little nuggets for those of us that are collectors and investors. They then give us an emotional roller coaster of everything in between and touch a little bit of everybody's needs, and then they finish it off with home run hits, and those typically fall usually within November because they want to have out their biggest hits right before Christmas. Now we didn't have that for Sword and Shield because of the pandemic and there was a constant run of delays, but overall they try to bring these sets around the perfect time, give you the best outcomes, and then they kick you back into the foundations in a brand new series. So what's the takeaway message from all this information? It's that there's no reason to panic. There's no reason to fear. We are on the same cycle that we've always been on. Pokemon has done a good job, and as you can see from the popularity, whether it's the TCG game, it's the number of collectors in the hobby, it's the money being spent, it's new countries coming in, you name it, Pokemon is very knowledgeable about what they're doing here, and they have a long-term strategy in mind. And we're here to enjoy that journey. So yes, Scarlet and Violet and Paldea Evolved today may not be our favorite sets of all times, but I don't think they were ever supposed to be. They were supposed to give the typical cycle of foundations as we then prepare ourselves for what Scarlet and Violet has to offer. In the meantime, we can continue to enjoy what's there for Sword and Shield, and when able and capable, we can also try to dip our toes back into Sun and Moon, XY, and beyond. While it's not healthy to live in the past, it's always good to look back and ensure you use the lessons that we should have learned so that we can make more educated and informed decisions in the future. And I hope this content today helped give you peace of mind and solidity in that Pokemon is here to stay, and we're running through just another Pokemon cycle. Thanks so much for joining us today here at Pokemon Wonder. If you like more Pokemon content, we have investment videos here. And if you like Pokemon product openings, we have videos here. Your time is deeply valuable, and we appreciate you spending it with us here today. And we look forward to seeing you on the next one.